Welcome to the It Is Written podcast. As doubts about God's will arise, the world resorts to feelings and experts. We go to the law and to the testimony of God's Word. In today's episode, we are taking a closer look at Jesus' command to his disciples to love one another just as he has loved us. What does that mean? And how can I have the kind of love that is willing to serve others as well as correct them when they need it?
So I'd like for us to look at John chapter 13 and some of the teaching of Jesus. Would you read verses 34 and 35?
I give you a new command. Love one another, just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another.
It's really a remarkable passage. For one thing, Jesus terms this a new command, and yet we know he commanded to love your neighbor as yourself in Leviticus chapter 19. How is this a new command? Well, you think about it, he's saying to love one another even as I have loved you. It's a new standard of love. Nobody had ever seen that kind of love until Jesus came, and so he's elevated the stakes here. It says love on that level. And then it's interesting to me that he says that that's the way you'll know that you're my disciples. People will know that you're my disciples by your love. We might think of other measures of whether or not someone's a real disciple of Jesus. But in this passage, at least, Jesus says they'll know that by your love for each other.
Yes, certainly.
So he makes that really important.
Yes, certainly. Jesus says other things about love and how people will know as well. I think about loving your enemies as well in Matthew 5. I think people will know that you're following Jesus if you love your enemies.
Few people do that.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Look at John 15. John 15, read verses 12 and 13.
This is my command. Love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends.
So again, Jesus is taking the front stage here. He's showing us what real love means by laying down his life for us, and we ought to love one another in that way. So every passage that you read just about will emphasize the importance of this command. I'm thinking about Romans 13 verse 8. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. He was in the context talking about giving everybody what you owe them. Taxes, custom, fear, honor. Owe nothing to anyone. Pay all your debts except to love one another. That's an unpayable debt. He says, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. So you can never love enough. You always owe more love. And love, he says, is the fulfilling of the law. Read verses 9 and 10 and he'll explain why.
The commandments, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and any other commandment, are summed up by this commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law.
Yeah, when you think about the commands that God gives in our relations with one another, they are just definitions and applications of the overall command to love one another. If you do love, you won't steal from someone, you won't murder them, you won't bear false witness against them, and so forth. So we really see that the specific commands are just an outgrowth of the basic command to love one another. That's why love is the fulfillment of the law. Almost every passage that deals with love puts it in a climactic spot. I'm thinking about Colossians chapter 3, which is really interesting how he does this in Colossians 3:14. After talking about various other attitudes, like in verse 12, compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, and 13, forbearance and forgiveness. But verse 14, beyond all these things put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. Love is almost always either the climax at the end or the beginning point. You know, love has always got the position front and center. Above all these, love. And so it's difficult to overemphasize the importance of love. Think about 1 Corinthians 13, which is a passage we often talk about with respect to love, but it's because it's so good and so important. 1 Corinthians 13 is really saying how without love we're absolutely nothing. This was in the context where people were overvaluing spiritual gifts, and he wanted them to see the overriding importance of love. Would you read chapter 13, verses 1 to 3?
If I speak human or angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so that I can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give away all my possessions, and if I give over my body in order to boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing.
If you have all these gifts to the nth degree, If you do all these self-sacrifices but you don't have love, you're absolutely zero. You cannot serve God without loving your brother. And he talks then in verses 4 through 7 about the specific characteristics of love. There are many points that the Corinthians especially needed, and that we need too to think about in understanding what love really means. But I want us to think about that a little bit more. In what sense do we love one another, and what will that love motivate us to do? Look at 1 John chapter 3, 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and truth. If you really truly love, you will take care of those who are in need. There's a lot of different aspects of what love means, but part of it is caring for the poor and needy. That is an important responsibility that we have. If we love others, we're going to take care of them when we can, when God gives us the opportunity and the ability to do that. People talk a lot today about social justice. Mm-hmm. And there's a sense in which that's exactly what the Bible commands. Think about Colossians chapter 4. This is a common command in the epistles. Colossians chapter 4 and verse 1. Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. He's exhorting the masters to treat their slaves fairly and justly and equitably. We understand that the first century was a time in which there were masters and slaves. But he doesn't just let that happen any direction that they want. He gives his rules about Christian masters need to treat their slaves equitably. You've got that in Ephesians chapter 6 as well. As you think about this social responsibility, read Ephesians 6 verse 9.
And masters, treat your slaves the same way, without threatening them, because you know that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him.
Yeah, you think about how we have a master. We better be a good master, or our master will treat us the way we treat our slaves. You can see Paul saying that to those brethren. So there's a lot of importance to the idea of loving one another and what it really means and how we need to apply that. I want you to come back to some of the teaching of Jesus then. Think about Matthew 16. Because I think Jesus broadens this out even more and helps us to put this in perspective. As always, Jesus has wonderful teachings for us. And so I'm thinking about Matthew chapter 16. Would you read verses 26 and 27?
For what will it benefit someone if he gains the whole world, yet loses his life? Or what will anyone give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will reward each according to what he has done.
It makes me think a little bit. While it's important to love each other in terms of what we do for each other in this life, when we consider the importance of our soul and the importance of eternity, the most important loving thing I can do is helping someone go to heaven, helping them save their soul. And that's why Jesus gave us a specific responsibility, a special responsibility, to go and teach the gospel to people. Think about Matthew 28, verse 19. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. If I love my neighbor, I'm going to teach him the gospel. I'm going to try to make a disciple out of him and help him follow Jesus, because that's what he needs more than he even needs a meal or needs justice or whatever. He needs to be right with God. Mark 16, Jesus gave the same exhortation to go and preach the gospel to every creature. And so we think a little bit about why Jesus came to the earth. What was his mission? And Jesus came to love. But I'm thinking like in Luke chapter 19, a passage we know well. Verse 10, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Jesus' biggest mission was not to feed everybody. He did feed the multitudes a couple of times, and he cared about them. But his bigger mission was to feed them spiritually, to seek and save that which was lost. And that's our biggest responsibility. When we think about our responsibility to love each other, thinking about it in spiritual and eternal terms is the thing that we need to focus in on the most. Even trying to teach people the truth and not error, and trying to unmask the false teachers so that they can be in the right way. That's also a very important responsibility and something that goes along with the idea of loving each other. In Jeremiah chapter 23, for example, in verse 22, if they had stood in my counsel, then they would have announced my words to my people and would have turned them back from the evil way and from the evil of their deeds. Mm-hmm. Somebody who teaches the truth is trying to help somebody turn back from their evil deeds and help them get themselves right with God. We might even think that was unloving in our society. Yeah. You're not supposed to tell anybody they're wrong. Well, if we love them, we'll try to turn them back from the evil of their deeds so they can be right with God and can be saved eternally. So when you think about love and the application of love, don't just think about it in terms of this life. Think about it in terms of the life to come, which is eternal and so much more important. You can also think about Jesus in Matthew 23. Jesus is very clear about the priority of love, and also in how we should deal with that. Matthew 22, actually. Matthew 22, would you read verses 34 to 40?
When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they came together. And when one of them, an expert in the law, asked a question to test him, "Teacher, which command in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commands."
So the first command is not to love your neighbor. That's the second command. The first command is to love God with all your heart. There's the priority of all priorities. Obviously, God comes first in everything. So we first think about loving God and then loving our neighbor. I think about the 10 Commandments. The first ones were about loving God. The latter ones about loving your neighbor. There's that same priority. Focus on God first, and because of God, you love your neighbor. And I think about what God's goal was for us. What's the ideal? So many people are thinking about how to make a good life in this life, how to help people just to be satisfied, help them to have their needs met, help them to find success and happiness and encouragement in this life. That's a good goal, but that's not the ultimate goal. I think about Jesus' prayer in John 17. This is the prayer he offered to God just before he was crucified. And in it, he talks about the things that he cared the most about. Would you read John 17, verse 24?
"Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, so that they will see my glory, which you have given me because you loved me before the world's foundation."
So you think about Jesus praying for his disciples that he loved so much, and what was his biggest concern, what was the biggest request he makes to God for them? That they would be with me where I am, and that they would see his glory that God gave him. I've never been where he is, and I've never seen his glory like that. But for those to be the ultimate things he asked God for his people that he loved, that must be amazing. Mm-hmm. To be with Jesus where he is and to see his glory must be the most amazing and magnificent thing we could possibly imagine. That would just go way beyond our ability to comprehend. But knowing that Jesus prayed earnestly to the Father for that shows us that that's the biggest concern we should have. So we're trying to help people, especially prepare for eternity and be able to be with the Lord and see his glory. When we love one another, we're going to love most in the ways that help each other to find the greatest blessings that God has for us.
So let me ask you this, Gary. Why is it sometimes perceived by people as unloving when you go to correct them or to show them error? Why doesn't it sometimes come off that way to them?
Yeah, sometimes people don't want to correct their lives. We want to feel good about this life. Mm-hmm. We don't necessarily want to prepare for eternity. We haven't really thought through and understood that the most loving thing anybody can do for me is help me to do the right thing and to rebuke me when I'm wrong. I don't enjoy hearing those things. I'd rather hear things that were pleasant. But the most helpful thing, the most loving thing is somebody correcting me.
And there's a disconnect between the physical and the spiritual, like you were talking about earlier. No one would have any issue with us, like if their house burned down or something happened. We came to help them physically. But when we see their spiritual house burning down, sometimes people aren't as happy when we point that out to them and want to help them.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think we don't value the same things the Lord does. Obviously, the Lord knows. He's been where we've been. Think about 2 Corinthians chapter 4 in that connection. though we, in 4:16, therefore we do not lose heart, but though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparisons, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. It all depends on our focus. If we're looking at the things that are seen, then we want people to make us feel good in this life. If we're looking to the things in the future, the things that are not seen but are eternal, then we want people to help us go to heaven. That's the most important thing we could ever have.
Thank you for listening to the It Is Written podcast. If you'd like to leave a review, we would ask that you would do so in your preferred listening platform so that we can use this as an opportunity to reach those who would like to hear God's Word. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to send Gary an email at garyfisher1063@gmail.com. We hope you have a blessed day.